First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello, everyone. This is Fox 12 Now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Greg Nibbler. We're live streaming here at the Fox 12 Oregon newsroom, and I recommend downloading the Fox 12 Oregon app to watch us live or after the fact, whichever one you're doing. Thanks for doing so. Today, for this segment, we are talking about Ed Asher and the forensics DNA analysis that was able to identify his remains. So in 2006, Ed, who was the former mayor of Fossil, Oregon, was over on the coast in Tillamook on a fishing trip or a crabbing trip, and went missing, ended up being presumed dead, and that was, again, in 2006, towards the end of the year. Well, related, but we didn't know at the time, up in Grays Harbor, Washington, several months later, remains were found and remained unidentified this entire time until very recently, when cutting-edge DNA forensics were able to identify the remains and then connect those to Ed, and able to actually, bring some closure there to understanding what happened as far as where he ended up. A huge step there and a huge thing to have happen. And we wanted to find out more about that process, how that happened, and what that can mean for other people as well. So to do so, we have the company who actually ran that. And joining us right now from Othram, we're joined by Colby Lasyone. And Colby, thank you very much for being here with us. I appreciate your time and joining us, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that have been reaching out to all of you to find out about this. And if you wouldn't mind, could you walk us through, just how you became involved with this case from the start?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for covering this important case. So Othram, we're based just north of Houston, Texas, and we work on cases across the nation and the world to help identify individuals, John and Jane Does, and criminals that are unknown suspects of crimes. Essentially, if there's any DNA available, then we're able to help. And the way that we work is law enforcement agencies reach out to us, and sometimes we reach out to law enforcement agencies ourselves and explain the fact that if there's forensic evidence available in a case, then we can help. And the way that we can help is we can build the best DNA profile that is very comprehensive and that can be used in genealogical searches that allow us to build family trees and ultimately provide the unidentified with their name. Sometimes this is after decades, like in this case, and sometimes it's even more than 100 years have passed since a person passed away while being nameless.
And so we're talking not just decades, but even 100 years. So what is it that you're looking for when you do have remains of that situation, that can help you identify these remains? As far as, decomposition would be something that I would think would be a big issue.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way that it works here at Othram is an agency will reach out to us and say, hey, this is a case that we have an unidentified individual, and this is the work that's been done in the past, and this is the evidence that is available. Our scientists will review that evidence, make a decision as to whether or not we believe that we can help. And the first thing that we do is a suitability analysis to understand the characteristics of the DNA that we're working with. We want to know how much DNA is present, is there degradation, and to what extent, if there is degradation, are there multiple contributors and other factors. And so once we do this suitability analysis, it informs us on the best path forward for that specific case, for that DNA that is in our hands, specifically how we can overcome any challenges, build the best DNA profile, and then subsequently do all the analysis that is required in order for us to infer identity for these individuals.
Is there anything with newer technology that's able to help you out in this process more than, say, previous years?
Absolutely. So there have been advances over the past decade, and some advances even more recently, where we can use high throughput DNA sequencing. This is being used routinely in medicine and research, but it has not been used routinely in forensics. And so Othram was founded around the central idea that we can bring the technology that exists in the world and that is being deployed and being used in non-forensic applications, we can bring that same technology into forensics. And when we do that in a methodical way, using proven science and protocols, we can reproducibly create these profiles at scale that will ultimately lead to identifications of people.
Is this utilizing things like, I mean, just to use the term that's used for everything, artificial intelligence or some generative technology to help assist with that identification or the building of those DNA sequences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are real live humans that work in our laboratory that build these DNA profiles. And then there are software tools that we develop that help to that basically make the DNA when you're digitizing forensic evidence, right? So you have physical evidence that gets created or gets developed into a digital profile, and that process of developing the profile does require advanced technology and advanced tools, and our team works to build those tools. We do have AI tools here at Othram that help to essentially provide investigative intelligence as well in cases, and that's on the DNA work and forensics as well as in other areas where we can assist investigators.
What were some of the biggest complications or challenges associated with this particular case? Because it's presumed that the remains were in ocean water, I would think, for quite some time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in any case, when you're working with skeletal remains, there can be a number of factors that you need to take into consideration. The conditions in which the bones were or the skeletal remains were exposed, environmental conditions, that is, and then also conditions that the remains could have been subjected to in any examination by a coroner or a medical examiner. And so this particular case we received in April of 2025 or early 2025, and in short order we were able to build the profile and then ultimately provide the leads back to the agency to ultimately get an identification. I'd say the number one barrier that did not exist in this case is funding. So the state of Washington has done a great job of dedicating the necessary funds to allow for this work to happen. And so in most cases, or in most states and most places, that's not the case. And so we're grateful for the folks that made this possible, for them taking a stand and really prioritizing this work so that ultimately we could have this identification.
I'm sure it differs from case to case, but how long, generally speaking, does it take to sequence DNA if you do have this kind of a sample that you had?
We can sequence DNA in a matter of a couple of days, and in most cases it takes a few weeks, and that's just for the moving of the case through our laboratory. But in a rush case where we're working with law enforcement on a contemporary matter, we can do that in a matter of days, over a weekend, for example. Most of these cases resolve in a matter of months, but some can resolve in anywhere from days to weeks, and then others can go on for some time, just depending on the specific situation. It's certainly case by case.
Once you sequence that DNA, where do you go to match that up with whoever the potential person could be?
So we use databases where individual users have consented to allow law enforcement to use their information to solve crimes. For example, Family Tree DNA has a database that the users have, through informed consent, allowed for the use of their data to help solve these cases. And so after the DNA profile is created, we search those databases and we compare the DNA profile of the unknown individual with all of the DNA profiles in the database, and then we ultimately get a list of relatives for this person. And usually those relatives are quite distantly related. And so that is the starting point that essentially allows us, they're puzzle pieces, if you will, that allow us to essentially put the puzzle together and ultimately solve for that identification.
And for this situation like that, so you were able to put that in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you found a family member. Is that how that worked?
Absolutely. So our role here at Othram is to complete the forensic matching, do the genealogical work, and then we provide leads back to law enforcement. And with those leads, we craft a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is, we believe that this individual is a descendant of, and we provide names. And in order to test that hypothesis, these are the next steps that you can take. The interviewing individuals, and then ultimately landing on a potential relative who will provide a DNA sample that can be used to do a comparison test with the unknown person, which gives us the final confirmation of that person's ID.
You know, with just in the U.S. alone, I know there's hundreds, if not thousands, of cases of unidentified remains that are out there. Does this kind of technology and what you're doing right there give hope that, you know, eventually a good chunk of those could be identified and matched up with potential family members?
Absolutely. If you go to Othram.com and you look at the recent casework, you're going to see a page full of faces. And those faces are the many faces of victims who have either been identified or whose crimes have been resolved through this technology. It's simply a matter of time. If there's DNA or there's forensic evidence from which we can get DNA, we can help to resolve the case.
And you mentioned one as old as 100 years. How far back can you go?
You know, we can go back pretty far. It's been over 100 years since a person was born that we were able to identify that this individual. And so, you know, we've worked cases where the skeletal remains were underwater for nearly 100 years and then found, and ultimately we were able to build a DNA profile from. The limitations, there are sometimes going to be limitations in certain cases, but the primary limiting factor at this point is access and the funding that allows for that access.
Wow, amazing. Just that this is where we're at here. And, you know, with the technology where it's at now, I'm assuming going back to that, you know, the iterative increases that happen with that and the way that, you know, it's exponentially getting better, that this is something that's even going to get more possible with maybe even less remains?
Yeah, absolutely. We can work from, you know, very small amounts of DNA, very scant or trace amounts at this point. And, you know, it will only improve with time. That's absolutely right.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, you know, for having time to talk to us, because I really appreciate it. I love learning about the science of this, and for everybody out there who has, you know, somebody who's missing and, you know, and can find out that there's this possibility that maybe you could have that kind of closure at some point. I mean, that's just huge.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's important for victims and their families to know that this technology is out there. So thank you so much for taking the time to cover.
Thanks, Colby. I really appreciate it. And for everybody watching, this is Fox 12 Now. We need to go to a break because we are going to be getting, I believe Spencer Schott, our reporter, on to join us. That's because we are live, as I mentioned there at the very beginning. If you're watching this after the fact, good time to download that Fox 12 Oregon app. And we have more on this case and everything else that we talked about at kptv.com as well. So you can go there and follow up and learn more about this, but certainly bringing some closure there to somebody who's been missing for a very long time. Really 2 decades almost. That's pretty tremendous. So thank you again for being here. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be back here in just a few with more on Fox 12 Now.